Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. On behalf of MIT Sloan CIO Symposium and the MIT Center for Digital Business, I want to welcome you to this session. I want to introduce our next speaker, Tom. But before I do that, just some housekeeping. I believe the restrooms are to your left as you walk out here. We are going to have, I believe, about 45 minutes of discussion. After that, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A. I could introduce Tom by just reading his bio, and I know you guys have his bio in your notebooks. But before I do that, I just want to let you know I have had the pleasure of actually working with Tom for a few years, so I could share a few tidbits with you that is not in your brochure. It's all going to be good. So I truly think that Tom is one of the really strongest visionaries that we've had at EMC. And one of the things that Tom has done is he realized early on, about 6 years ago or so, that we needed to have within EMC a team of people that help CIOs solve their problems beyond just the infrastructure and the technology piece. And he essentially started from scratch the McKinsey within EMC. So he's single-handedly responsible for starting EMC Consulting Group.
But if there are McKinsey folks in the crowd, don't be too worried about that.
So one of the things I also want to share with you is not only Tom a wonderful executive in terms of his execution of that vision and how he's helped a lot of CIOs kind of get through different hurdles in terms of moving to IT as a service, which is a topic of this conversation. He's also a great father. Tom, I remember personally, we had an event. It was an executive event after hours. And Tom couldn't make it because he was going to go to his kid's soccer tournament. And that's, as a father, that's something I really appreciate. So without further ado, it is my pleasure, my honor to introduce Tom Roloff.
Thank you. So thank you for joining me and EMC here today. I appreciate the chance to chat with you a little bit. I have some connection to this institute. I am a Sloan grad, as is my wife. And while I haven't been back at Sloan actively for some time, I still live in the Boston area. And I have to thank you for whoever organized this being right here at Kresge. Michelle and I were married right in that chapel over there, so I have a very meaningful and deep connection to this place. So thank you for letting me spend an hour with you on a completely different subject. I have been spending some time over the past couple of years really helping clients to understand how technology is affecting business and how CIOs really, the role of the CIO is really changing. And I see a number of things occurring more and more frequently, which is really the title of this conversation. We're having active conversations with a number of different CIOs across the world about the shift that cloud is enabling to become more of a provider of services inside of IT, and how increasingly with the convergence of a private cloud and a public cloud, CIOs have to start thinking about which of those services am I going to provide myself because I built them in my own four walls, and how am I going to think about the services that I might procure from a public cloud provider. And we call that conversation a conversation about being a broker of services. First of all, getting a services mentality into IT, and then thinking about which of those services that I'm going to offer the business are services that I'm going to build myself, and which ones am I going to use a public cloud for, and how do I connect those two things? So I want to tell you a little bit about some of those conversations, why I think they're important, what we're learning in talking to some CIOs about that, and hopefully get into a little discussion at the end with you guys about particular issues that you might have or that might trigger. So I'll give you a little context. First of all, this is not new to any of you. I think it's absolutely true that IT is becoming a more and more important part of almost every revenue stream in almost every industry that I can think of, right? If you're in banking, you're in IT. If you're in retail, data, you're in IT. If you're in telco, you're in IT. Frankly, if you're in manufacturing, IT is becoming a part of those revenue streams as well. So I think the business is transforming very quickly and expecting more and more from us as a technology community. There are also alternatives. you once had, we as IT departments had a monopoly on IT services. We were the company's IT department. That is no longer true. I think the monopoly that we benefited from for 30, 40, 50 years, rapidly eroding, and the business has choices. And frankly, because it has choices, it is able to raise the bar on its expectations that it has of all of you. And so I think it's important to understand that and take that into account as you develop your IT strategy. And finally, I think there's a lot going on in technology. The conversation that we'll have, and maybe some of the perspectives that I'll share with you, they're very real today. They were impossible to have 5 years ago. The technology did not exist to go enable the kinds of transformations that we're talking about at this point. Simply, it wasn't there, but it is now. And so I think the pace of technology is accelerating in this regard, and I think there are, hopefully all of you in the audience are on some part of this journey. I think it's an interesting and challenging set of things for us as an IT community to go work with. So let me talk to you about, at the very highest level, what I'm going to talk to you, suggest to you is that there is business value in becoming a provider of services, in IT departments becoming a provider of services. And I think that's true because the business doesn't really care about technology, right? It cares only about the things that technology can do for the business. It cares about how technology enables a revenue stream, how technology enables a salesperson or an engineer or a manufacturing department. It doesn't necessarily care about what technology that is riding on. So getting IT to start becoming and having a bigger seat at the strategy of the enterprise is a conversation about becoming embedded into business processes, not just managing an IT budget. I think there are two value propositions to that transformation, and they are on that page there, right? One is, frankly, I think, how many of you all had IT budgets go up more than 5% in the past year? Raise your hand if your IT budget grew more than 5%. Wow. You are lucky. I want to talk to you afterward. I have some things I'd like to talk to you about. So, how many of you had your IT budgets flat to down? Yeah, I mean, that is generally in a room this size, right? You'll have very few people, like this gentleman in the back here, a couple up front here, that say, my IT budget went up more than 5%. By the way, revenue stream expectations are going up more than 5% in most of your enterprises. And IT budgets being flat to down is sort of the way it's been for the past few years. It's the way it's going to be. I think there's a part of this value proposition of moving to being a provider of services that is a huge cost implication on the way you run IT. And I'm going to walk you through that a little bit. And I think that's an important thing to remember because these are transformations that are not done in a month or in a quarter or even in a year. They will take some time. And it's important to be able to sit there and say to the rest of your stakeholders in your enterprise, what's in it for some of the key stakeholders, like the CFO, perhaps like some others who are interested in using budget for different reasons. You have a way of using this transformation to IT as a service to create some cost savings opportunities. I'm going to walk you through that. The second and the more important part is shown on the left-hand side. That's around agility. That's around how do if I embrace IT as a service and if I am able to embed myself as a provider of services into the enterprise more directly, how does that help me to move at the speed of business much more? And I think that's the one we should spend a little bit more time on. It's by far the larger value proposition. But frankly, it's hard to quantify, and it's something we have to complement with something more quantifiable, like the things on the left-hand side. Let me start with the cost side of the equation a little bit. So the right side of this chart is the average IT budget for, this happens to be financial services, and they are different by industry, but not radically different by industry. And the right-hand bar chart takes the average IT budget for a large bank and breaks it into a few categories. The one on the bottom in gray is essentially everything that is total legacy stuff, the mainframe, the mid-range, the facilities, the things, frankly, that I'll suggest to you it's pretty hard to move the needle on how much that costs today. There are ways to do it, and EMC is happy to talk to you about ways to do that, but there's not much we're going to do to move, to appreciably change the cost structure of that part of your architecture. The next group is the distributed systems, hardware, and all the hardware in your IT budget, be that storage, server, or network. And what's interesting about that is, right, in the average IT budget, that's 6% of the average OpEx in your IT budget. It's almost 100% of your CapEx budget, but the annual OpEx of that is very small. We spend a ton of time in IT saying, let's go save 50% on servers. Or let's go rethink exactly what we're spending on network switches, or if you're talking to my company, on storage. And I think that's a great thing to do, and we ought to do that. But if we were to cut that spend in half, we'd move the needle on the OpEx budget by like 3%. And the reason that that's interesting is because if we're going to go create cost savings by moving to IT as a service, we've got to worry about those 3 buckets at the top: internal services, external services, and frankly, software and software licensing. We've got to get, and particularly, we've got to get at the people side, right? If we were to be able to do the things we do in IT 10% more efficiently, we would save more money than if we cut our hardware expense to 0 in most enterprises. So part of the value proposition that I challenge you with is, as you think about a transformation in IT to cloud, to IT as a service, to a brokering strategy, understand this about yourself and figure out what are the buckets of cost and how am I going to go have a conversation with my CFO to get him to support what I want to go do if I can't articulate for him how it's going to change the way I run IT. Because that second bar chart will suggest to you that you can get to an IT as a service type model. And when you do that, you move the needle a little bit on, on mainframe and facilities and so on. You move it quite a bit, although it doesn't have much of an impact on server storage and network infrastructure. You're really going to make a difference, though, in people, because you're heavily going to automate the work that people do today, and you're going to create a much more standardized way of delivering service to the business. That is a big budget saving, right? If you're a bank and you've got a $2, $3, $5 billion IT budget, we're talking about $500, $600, $700 million a year in difference in cost structure. And we'll talk about how we get there, but those are appreciable cost savings, and we are helping companies get to those kinds of benefits. Now, I don't advise you to talk to your CFO about the fact that I can save 24% of the IT budget, because all those folks that raised their hand about having a 5% or bigger growth in their IT budget, that will be taken away like that, and you will be handed a lower goal, right? But if you could put that in the context of, I actually want to take some cost out of keeping the lights on, out of maintaining what I'm doing, and redeploy that spend into those innovations that you keep asking me about. I don't know, big data innovation, analytics innovations, end user compute and mobility innovations. There is a way to use this movement to IT as a service to not only create agility and cost reduction, but to fund some of the efforts that I think your business actually wants you to invest in. So I think that's an important part of a business case around this kind of transformation that I encourage you, as you think about these kinds of conversations, to embrace, because you're going to have to sustain this transformation over the period of a year, 2 years, sometimes longer, and being able to do that in the context of a strong business case is certainly a best practice that we spend a lot of time with CIOs about. So I said I would chat with you a little bit about the agility side, and it's by far the most important. Let me ask you guys this question. In your organizations, how frequently do you believe, or raise your hand if you believe that more than half the time your business is considering a service provider other than internal IT for a new service? Raise your hand if it's more than 50% of the time. About a third of the room. Yeah, you're not atypical, right? So here's some data that suggests you're about right? So 1 in 8 of us companies are going half the time. They're definitely going out to some third-party provider and thinking about that as a service. The ones that are going more than a quarter of their time are up to about half the population. And the reason that business owners or business users, or frankly even you as IT community, go out to third-party providers is some of the things on the right. I can get it much faster. I can understand the cost structure of what I'm getting right away. I can spin it up and I can spin it down. These are advantages that I seem to be getting from a third-party provider of services that my internal IT department can't match. I want all those things. Let me go and get them from a third-party provider because I can't get my internal IT department to go do it. That, to me, is the beginning of the erosion of the monopoly that you guys have had on running IT for your enterprise, right? Because I think this value proposition is very compelling. By the way, you can add to that at times, it also appears to be cheaper, right? So if it's cheaper and it's faster and I can spin it up and I can spin it down, these are things that are very enticing. And I don't blame your business users at all for considering an alternative to internal IT. So how do we go about creating an IT architecture internally that starts to match that value proposition or perhaps over time exceed it? I think that's what being a broker of services is all about. And I think that has really 3 main elements to it. One is a new business model around IT. We've talked about it a little bit already. This is about being a provider of services to the business. We'll talk more about what I mean by that, but let me suggest to you that means you've got to understand what services matter to the business. This is not about reacting to a business that says, give me a Unix test and dev environment, this is the kind of environment that I need. This is about you proactively understanding that Unix test and dev environments for your enterprise should come in 3 flavors, gold, silver, and bronze. And we ought to be able to stand those up almost automatically in a period of minutes or hours at worst, and not create a long process to include procurement and all kinds of other organizations to go stand one up one at a time. So we'll talk more about what I mean by that, but that is a fundamental tenet of this business model. Second is it's market-driven. You have spent time with your business and you understand the services the business wants. I call that a demand-driven approach. You understand what the business demands, not a supply-driven approach. This is not, here are all the things I could do for you. How do you want me to put these Lego pieces together to go create the custom service you want? This is having the business say, this is what I want from you, and having you say, I hear you. In order for me to deliver those kinds of services, here's what I've got to be able to do. I'm going to go architect my IT architecture to be able to provide those services to you in a very seamless way. The third one around P&L focus, it's in quotes here. I'm not suggesting that IT should become a profit center, but it does need to understand its cost. And if the business is out there essentially benchmarking you against a third-party provider of a similar service, you need to understand what their price to your business partners are. And you need to understand how you're going to create a compelling value proposition on the cost side as well. And finally, this idea of being both a broker of services. There are some things that you can decide can come from a third-party provider that belong as a service in your architecture, and a builder of service, things that you're going to do yourself. I think it's a very important decision for you all to make. Am I going to become a broker as well as a builder? Or am I essentially just a builder, and I'm going to decide that anybody who's brokering anything without my approval, I'm just going to basically ignore that and hope that that goes away. I would suggest to you that latter strategy is not one that we see winning in too many enterprises. So I said to you that this is possible now in ways that it wasn't 3 or 5 years ago because there are technologies out there that enable it. We'll talk a little bit about those technologies, not too much, I hope. But you hear lots of things about private clouds and public clouds and hybrid clouds. You hear about end-to-end automation of various IT processes. You hear about things like getting financial transparency around what assets are being aggregated to serve a certain workload or provide a certain service. And you hear, I think, more and more about creating service capabilities inside your IT organizations. Those technologies very much exist today. They're very much more mature than they were a few years ago, and they're the underpinnings of that business model on the left-hand side. I don't think the technology side is slowing down this trend much at all anymore. I think what we're finding in most enterprises and most IT departments is this is the stuff that's slowing things down. The people, the process, the org model, those are hard changes because what we're talking about is changing the way we work. We're talking about going from being a provider of infrastructure and various technologies to the business to interfacing with the business and saying, I understand what you want. Given what you told me you want, this is what I'm going to go build. Being much more front office, marketing your IT department rather than back office, taking an order and trying to fulfill a specific requirement. We got to get to the point where if we're going to talk about services to the business, we've got people that are accountable for those services. Who is accountable for setting up test and dev environments in your enterprise for this given business unit? If nobody's accountable for it, this process becomes something that gets disaggregated and many people get involved, and frankly, your ambitions of doing this in hours can rapidly get whittled away over time. So it requires a way to structure your IT department differently as well. And finally, it requires a skill set in your IT department that is not the one you've been promoting for in the past couple of years. When you promoted somebody to be the data center manager, he understood a certain set of technologies really, really well. You've got a very, very deep, very narrow set of skills. When we talk about being a service provider, now you're a marketeer of your services. You're accountable for something that is technologically quite complicated, this service that you created. And you need a set of people that can speak to the business about that. These things are slowing down the transformation to IT as a service way more than technology at this point, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So, what are the main attributes? Well, this service mentality is self-service. The business is going to serve themselves these services that you created. You're going to be very service-oriented in IT. You're going to create a catalog of services that the business wants that you're going to render to the business. It's going to be highly automated. The actual physical orchestration of all the different assets that come together to render that service to the business, that's going to be highly automated and financially transparent. You're going to know for this service, these are the components I need to aggregate. In order for me to do that, the cost structure is X. Here's what I'm going to go charge, maybe you just show, but you can let the business know, here's how much that service cost when you procure it from me. And finally, it's going to be consumerized, which is to say, I'm not going to limit myself to the idea that you got to be sitting in corporate headquarters behind a PC to go do that. You can get at this service in many different ways, and the mobile workforce that your enterprises are all living with have a way of accessing all of this. Now, I could tell you a bunch of stories about IT, and I'll tell you a little bit about EMC IT and how EMC IT has made this transition, but I thought I would take something that is not directly IT-oriented. I thought I would talk about other industries and other companies that are making this kind of transition. And so, with your permission, I'll pick Tesla as, to me, an interesting example of another industry that has the same attributes. It has attributes of creating a service, of making it self-service, of orchestrating those services deeply and automating them deeply, and getting to the point where certainly we're financially transparent about that. So I'll try to draw some connections between what I see industries like Tesla doing and what I see us doing in IT, and hopefully we can get into a conversation later about how relevant that is to you. So let me start with the way that you interface with Tesla. If you buy a Tesla, right, ultimately you're going to go to the Tesla website. You can go to the showroom, but you're going to go to a Tesla website to order your Tesla car. What is that Tesla website? It's a portal. And it says, you know, what color Tesla do you want? Well, you can order a Tesla in 9 colors. You can see them over there. By the way, somebody thought about those 9 colors. They're not 19, they're not 29 colors, there are 9. Somebody thought hard about what 9 colors am I going to allow people to procure. And that's all I'm going to go do. And I'm sure that if I have those 9 colors, I'm going to capture all the market that my target customers really want. By the way, how many of you are Tesla drivers in the audience? No Tesla drivers? You are the target market for Tesla. They're after all of you. And seriously, technologists with healthy incomes, you're all going to be driving Teslas according to the Tesla guys. Huh? You're a stockholder. I'm worried for you. I'm very worried for you. I don't give stock advice, but man, that's I love this car. I'm not sure that'll be interesting to see what happens. So back to, all right, so we're going to get to the point where there's a user portal of a service catalog, right? I made some decisions about the things that I'm going to offer my users. I'm going to create a quick website, not a quick website, a nice looking website that allow my business users to interact with me. And I'm going to give them choices, but I'm not going to give them infinite choices. I'm going to give them a few. And by the way, when they select the color, then I'm going to say, okay, now go and you can pick one of 5 interiors. Not 15, not 14 shades of gray. You get 5. And that is going to hopefully cover the market that my business customer wants for Tesla cars. Lots of decisions behind that, right? IT departments could be making similar decisions about the things that they want to offer their business users. Now, EMC IT, right? So I'll try to bring it back to IT. So here's EMC IT saying, I'm going to create a portal for all the 60,000 EMC employees. You can't quite see it on here, but we're going to offer collaboration. We're going to offer client computing and hosting and identity and access management and personal services. We're going to have a number of things that the EMC organization is saying to Vic Bhagat, our CIO, these are the things we need from you. By the way, that list goes on and on and on, and this chart's about a year old now. Now it's, I want a lab as a service, and I want data as a service, and I want BI as a service. So the service catalog is ever expanding inside of EMC right now. But it's not going to get infinite, right? We're going to go, make this relatively concise and say, here, business users, if these are the things you want, we'll go architect an IT department that delivers those kinds of services to you. So behind that fancy, nice interface that allows you to procure IT as a service, there has to be the guts of what services you're actually allowed to procure, and we call that a service catalog. So in Tesla's case, right, there's 2, you can buy a Model S and you can buy a Model S Performance. And if you say I want a Model S, by the way, you don't have a whole lot of options, but you've got some options. You have this thing called the tech package, right? I can say in my Model S, do you want the tech package, in which case I get certain extra horsepower and I get certain extra features coming out of the engine and I get a few extra bells and whistles. And by the way, I know exactly how much that's going to cost me as soon as I order it as well, right? So this service catalog has articulated behind it specific things that the business user can buy. They are pre-thought by, in this case Tesla, could be pre-thought by IT. And as we create those bundles, we have an ability to express our inventory in bundled ways. And frankly, that gives us a great opportunity to standardize the inventory that we have, right? If we actually understood, here are all the services that the business really needs from us, in order to provide those services, here's the infrastructure blueprints that I actually need to go make that happen. Here's the middleware blueprints. Here's the application blueprints. The amount of standardization that I can drive is substantial. Instead of saying, I'm going to respond to the next application developer who wants a certain kind of an application development environment, I'm going to offer them 3 different kinds of environments, and I know that one of those 3 is going to work for you. And by the way, when you develop on those platforms, it's going to develop, when it promotes to production, on a blueprint that I already have in my service catalog. Those are ways that we can enforce technology standards and really get us out of some of the complex infrastructure that underlies some of our systems. Those services have costs and policies and SLAs, right? We can embed that into all. If you want a gold app dev environment, you get it in minutes. And it can be this big. And if you want a bronze one, it'll take me a day to spin it up, and frankly, I'm not going to back it up at all, right? So these are things I can specify inside the service catalog and render to the user in that portal. And IT does this, right? So we talk a lot about infrastructure as a service. Let's go talk about server as a service. Let's go talk about storage as a service. These are very narrow definitions of services that we can provide, but they're interesting building blocks, right? We can start with an infrastructure service. We can go to a platform service. Let's go think about an application development platform, and let's go allow people to have 3 different flavors of platforms as a service. Let's go talk about software as a service. Maybe we've got payroll, or maybe we've got Salesforce automation. Maybe, by the way, we're doing that ourselves, or maybe we're going with a SaaS provider for Salesforce. These are the extensions of the service catalog that we can create over time that, frankly, will start to have you asking yourself, how much of this am I building and how much of this am I going to buy? So let's go on to the next thing. So now imagine we have a great portal. The business interfaces with the portal. It's connected to my service catalog. I know exactly the services that I'm rendering to the business. How do I actually get all the different spaghetti that has to come together to render that service? How do I make that happen? So I'll go back to Tesla a little bit, right? So Tesla knows a lot about how you drive a Tesla car. It knows exactly when you hit the 5,000 mile mark. And that sends a little message back to the factory that says, hey, Susan just hit the 5,000 mile mark on her Tesla. She needs the 5,000 mile service. Go send her a message on the center console that's sitting in the car about the fact that it's the 5,000 mile checkup time. The local's dealership is 4.2 miles from her house. Here are 4 different dates when you can come in for a service check, for the 5,000 mile service check. Click on the screen, and you'll be scheduled for that particular time. That's a very different process than the way most of us service our cars, right? I mean, I don't know. I have to call the dealer, and I have to sit there and say, I think it's time for whatever, my 25,000 mile checkup. And frankly, that process is very tedious. This is an orchestration of that process that can go much faster. There were no Tesla drivers in the room, right? That's too bad, because I wanted some validation of this one. So there might be by the time we're done. I don't know. I want one of these cars, I'll be honest with you. How many electric vehicle drivers are there? Anybody driving a Prius or something else electric? One? Or what are you driving, sir?
So I have 3 hybrids.
Oh, fantastic. All right, so tell me if this is true of your hybrids, right? So apparently, and I have yet to test drive a Tesla, but apparently if you take your foot off of a Tesla at a stoplight, the car doesn't go anywhere, right? The engine's off. So there's no, that traditional creep when you're in a gas car, you take your foot off the gas pipe, it kind of creeps forward. So you put your foot on the brake pedal, put your foot on the brake pedal at a traffic light to not get the car creeping forward. Does that happen to your car as well?
So in the Prius, yes.
In the Prius, yes, okay.
And the engine shuts off, of course, when it's warmed up.
Right. So apparently this freaks a lot of people out who are used to driving gas cars. They sit at the traffic light, they have their foot planted firmly on the brake, and it's freaky when they leave their foot off and the car doesn't actually start moving forward. So Tesla decided, look, I can figure out a way to give you that feature. I will, seriously, literally, I will send you over a wire, I will send you an upgrade to the software of the engine that will add the creep feature. Literally, so you'll go sit there and say, there's a little option, you want the creep feature, you click yes, and boom, over a wire, download onto the software of the car. The software, you'll hear this from Tesla, right? The software changes the hardware, right? So the feature of, I'll take my foot off, and all of a sudden the car will start creeping forward. Now, there's a lot of things that happened when you pushed that additional upgrade into the software package, right? A lot of things happened. You changed a lot of things in the software package that is running that engine. Those are the kinds of things that heavy orchestration, frankly, can and should be doing, and we can be thinking about similar ways to do that. This is not something where we had to bring it into the car dealership and they had to go get their mechanics out and they had to go do a bunch of things to it. This came over a wire. This came through software. This was a heavily orchestrated manual process traditionally, if you ever could do this kind of thing to a regular gas car. But now it's automatic, instantaneous through software. That's the kind of orchestration that I think moves the needle on having 55% of your cost attached to people and bringing that down to something like 40 or 45%. So, you know, IT does this as well. So here's my EMC IT example for you. Your right is, no, your left, sorry. Your left is the process it took EMC to procure and test a dev environment about 4 years ago. So if, you know, and by the way, we are a bunch of engineers, right? So we're forever standing up labs and test and dev environments. This was an unbelievably complicated process. The software and hardware engineering organizations at EMC used to continuously complain to our CIO about, this is completely bananas, I don't know why it takes us this long. And through a process of heavily automating and orchestrating and developing services around what does it mean to have a test and dev environment, we can do that in a day, right? So we have a service that allows you to stand up a lab as a service. It'll take hours to go do that now. It used to take us 4 months. But that's because we understood all the different components and all the different processes, and we automated those processes. And more than that, we found a way to create blueprints around repeatable bundles of services that can be connected together to speed that process up so that you're not coming up with a custom app dev environment every time. You're coming up and enforcing standardized environments over time. So my suggestion to you is that Tesla does it with a creep function. You know, your IT departments can do similar things with heavy orchestration. And finally, this idea of being a broker, right? So Tesla has an interesting set of problems, right? The little picture you see there on the left side is one of those supercharger stations, right? So the biggest reason people are not buying Teslas is because they're afraid they're going to run out of electricity somewhere when they're driving their car. So Tesla made an interesting decision as a car manufacturer. It said, I'm going to get into the gas station business. I'm going to not become a broker and leave it to somebody else to go create gas stations. I'm going to create my own gas stations. And they're about to build all these supercharger stations, across the US in order to take the fear that you're going to run out of juice while you're driving a Tesla away from you. They couldn't convince anybody else to do this. They had to do it themselves. And so they're building it themselves. But they made the opposite decision on a bunch of other things, right? So within the system in the car, there's a media system, there's a navigation system, there's access to the internet, there's energy consumption, there's cameras, there's all kinds of electronics in there. They developed none of that. They didn't even develop the system that connects these different pieces. They said, I'm taking that all from a third party and I'm integrating that into my architecture. But they're integrating that into their architecture, right? This is not some random additional gauge that gets added to the dashboard somewhere. This is deeply integrated into the way they think about the experience that the user has with the car. So some things they've decided I'm going to do myself, including fueling stations. And some things they've decided I can definitely procure from somebody else because the other guys are as good or better as I'm ever going to be on this stuff. So let me go get that from somebody else. And then they decided I'm going to integrate that into one system, one architecture. And my suggestion to you is that we have similar challenges in IT, right? We can decide to ignore the public cloud. We can decide that, you know, I don't know who's doing that, but it isn't coming with my blessing. And, you know, if that data goes out there in the public cloud and something bad happens to it, I in IT am not going to worry about that. That is one approach. But I think there's a lot of innovation going on in public clouds, and the idea that you could bring a public cloud service and your existing internal services together into one set of services for your business users, that's a powerful value proposition. And I would suggest to many and all of you, if you're not thinking about providing services in that way, you're missing a big piece of a value proposition here. So how do we bring all that together? So this is, frankly, PowerPoint is great, right? You can draw all kinds of things in PowerPoint. But let me suggest to you the components of a technology architecture that do this. And these technology components exist, and frankly, they're far more integrated now. So it starts with a service catalog, right? Let's understand the services that the business needs from IT. Let's articulate them fully, all the way down to an appreciation for that service requires these kinds of components. Let's articulate those services in a user portal that is, come on, we're IT guys, right? We build websites all the time. Let's build a nice website that people can interface with to say, I know the services that IT provides, and I'm going to go to that user portal. If I've got a new employee starting and I need to get him a PC, I'm going to go to the user portal to do that. If I am an engineer and I need to do some application development, I'm going to go to the user portal to do that. If I need to go spin up a virtual machine, I'm going to go to the user portal to go do that. Let's take those services in that user portal connected to a policy and an orchestration engine and make sure that I understand how all the different components that have to come together to render that service come together. We're going to understand the inventory of services, of components that we have. We're going to tie those to that orchestration engine, and we're going to assemble the right pieces for that given service for that given user. And underneath all that, we're going to make sure we understand the cost structure of each of those components so that when I put that service together, I can tell the business user it costs roughly X for this environment, or your department is going to be charged roughly X for this environment. That, to me, is a private cloud architecture. When you connect that to a brokering function that also understands what's available in a public cloud environment, now you've gotten a way to reason over things you do internally and things you can get from a third party. And now you need to understand in this brokering function what would have to be true of that IT environment that is providing an external service for it to be, I don't know, compliant with your regulatory environment, compliant with the policies and other controls that you have internally. But those things can be known, right? I mean, we can sit there and say, only find me things that keep the data in the country of its origin. And if I don't have that, make sure that my brokering function knows that I can't go to that public provider because I'll be in violation of some regulatory environment that I'm under. Those kinds of things can be specified, they can be defined, and these kinds of architectures, these pieces are coming together, frankly. Now, they need to be connected to the way you run IT today, right? There's still a service management function back here. But if you're taking the work out of pulling all these pieces together, if you're taking that out of your environment, now you're starting to move the needle on the cost structure. And now you're starting to actually say these services can be provisioned through a user portal in hours and maybe as much as a day, and I'm getting that agility that I really want to go give my business users. So my suggestion to you is this is what IT as a service and cloud and becoming a broker of services is all about, and it's possible to go do this. And the great news for you is it can create a lower cost structure for you that can fund some of your future initiatives as well. But I did tell you that the hard part here is the organizational side, right? So we can do this all technologically. We still have to change the way IT operates. And that is actually, I think, the thing that is pacing this journey at this point. You've got the business users saying, okay, I like the idea that you're going to give me services. And what they really want is they want to tell you what services they want. They want to express their voice. They want, when they request a service, they want it delivered right on time, and they want to know the price of that service. Like their customers, like everybody else. So we're spending lots of time with IT organizations saying, how do I build an IT architecture that has a services strategy, that has a portfolio of services, that knows how I can design services that my business wants? And frankly, how do I get to the point where I'm proactively helping to manage the demand for certain services and explaining to them what we could do for them as well as what they're asking us to do? So we're going to get a roadmap of services that IT is going to provide. Then we've got a service delivery and support organization that says someone just clicked on, I want a test and dev environment, it's a gold one. Let's go make sure we've got a group of people that are accountable for making sure that happens in the most seamless way possible. And then we've got a financial group that really understands metering and services policies and costs that are able to aggregate all that up and say, these are the services you procured for me last quarter, here is how much that cost, I'm showing you the expense that you incurred in IT for us to provide you those services. We do that based on a set of skills and competencies and roles, and we do that in an infrastructure that is increasingly cloud-like both in the private and the public space. So that structure at some level, is we don't show up, you don't show up on Monday and say, I got a new work structure, right? Getting from here to there and combining that with the technology transition and with this business case that we're talking about, that's an evolution to an end state that we see more and more customers moving to in an IT world. So when that's all done, maybe we go from an app dev environment that required logging requests and getting approvals and getting procurement involved to something that gets brought on from the portal. Maybe we get to, thank you for opening that door. We all thank you for opening that door. Onboarding a new employee might be something that had very serial processes. They're now much more interconnected. Getting a new laptop is something that required some manual process and now is something that can be done as a service on the portal. I think that's out there, it's possible. There are many of your colleagues and peers that are moving in that direction. I will suggest to you that there are 3 parts to that transformation, in addition to a business case. The first is you got to make sure you understand the infrastructure architecture that you want to have. And frankly, you know, an x86 architecture is pretty central to enabling this kind of massive orchestration. The second piece is you got to have an operating model, complete with an organizational structure ultimately that talks about portals and service catalogs and policy engines and orchestration engines and metering engines. These are key components of that architecture that you need to be thinking about if you're going to go create this. And finally, you've got to think about your applications, right? Your applications are, by the way, I said finally, most clients nowadays are asking us to start with the application. They're like, I get it, Tom, that's what we want. Help me understand which of these applications I can start moving to an IT as a service model in what order. And help me understand which of these applications I want to take and do internally, and which do I want to take from a third party. So an application-driven approach through this process is becoming a best practice. Start with a business unit that has 100 apps and say to that business unit, what are you really using those apps for? What is the business process? What is the service you're really trying to get out of that? Let's talk about those services. Let me migrate those applications to an architecture and an org that looks like this, underpinned by an infrastructure that's far more liquid than what you've had historically. So there are ways to get through that, and I think I have one more chart here. Yeah. You know, some folks will start with, hey, I want to create infrastructure as a service, right? I just want to render storage as a service or I don't know, servers as a service, and I'll go figure out an infrastructure service catalog, and that'll help me standardize a few things, and then I'll move to platform as a service next. And as I get that done, I'm going to go talk about application rationalization, and I'll finally get into DevOps and the software development lifecycle. This is one path through it, right? Another path through it is, let's start with the applications. I've done an application rationalization exercise. Let me talk about new app dev and SDLC, and let me start there. And that'll get me to a platform as a service conversation underpinned by infrastructure. So there are multiple ways through that. I think it's useful for you all to think about how does applications, operating model, and infrastructure come together to get you to IT as a service. You know, your mileage will vary, your path through this will vary, but I guarantee you that ultimately to get to a point where you've got stateless applications in an app store or a service catalog in an agile self-service consumption model and software defined in your infrastructure, you're going to do all 3 of those things. So it's a matter of how you navigate from where you are to that future end state and transform your infrastructure, your applications, and your operating model as you go through that. EMC's done that. You know, EMC back in 2004 was an $8 billion company. It's now, I think it was $23.5 billion last year. I should update my slide. So we have about tripled the revenue of EMC. The IT budget is $66 million less in 2012 than it was in 2004. So that's a tripling of the workload of the IT department. And I know there are scale economies, and that's all true, right? But there is a tripling of the amount of people and revenue that this IT architecture supports, and it is run on 66 million less than it was 8 years ago. The user productivity is up. You know, agility measured in terms of how long does it take to procure an environment of some kind is much, much faster. And you get some strong green benefits as well, right? So I think the business case for this, back to the first slide, very sound, right? It's not a static business case. Your businesses are growing. You're going to need to avoid cost going forward. You know, this is something where EMC has managed to avoid massive cost increases over the past 10 years. But the real value proposition is getting to the point where your business users are feeling like you're able to render services to them, services that matter to them in a seamless, easy, agile way, just as they get from some public cloud provider. And you've done it in such a way that you've pre-thought what are the services that you're building and what are the services that you're procuring from a public cloud, and you brought that together into one architecture. So I think that's what's out there for all of us. Frankly, that's a really exciting place to be. You know, if we're saving, what EMC IT has done with these savings is said, I'm getting into analytics, right? I'm investing heavily into the analytics side of the equation. That's CapEx. How am I funding a lot of that CapEx? Well, I don't spend it on the same stuff I used to spend it on now. By the way, that's OpEx. I've got all kinds of people helping me think about how to get from here to there. But I'm saving OpEx in the way I run the business, so I'm freeing up money to go help me with some of those new projects. I think that's all I had for you guys, but I would welcome a chance to have a few minutes of conversation. Yes? You are the man with a 5% plus increase in budget.
Let me explain that, because I want you to talk about it if you would. I'm in that process of transforming. So the point going from old to new takes an investment.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's an overlap.
Yes.
And so what I've been able to convince my institution is that for a while we're trying to go from the old to the new, I need some more money.
Good for you.
Only to be, then eventually to reduce that.
Good for you.
So talk about that.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, so that two bar charts that you saw over there, the before and after picture, those are steady state endpoints, right? And frankly, getting from here to there is not a zero cost exercise, right? If you have to, so one of the reasons I encourage you to go create a business case about the two endpoints is you want to go tell your business, this is the endpoint I can get to. There are hundreds of millions of dollars at stake getting there. I need this much money to fund the bubble investment. Now, you're probably working with all kinds of different vendors that can help you absorb some of that bubble cost. You should do that, right? That doesn't mean that you've got to back up the truck and get out the checkbook for all of that. There are lots of folks who are happy to help you make that bubble as small as possible, but there is a bubble cost. And one of the reasons to go create the business case is because you got to finance the transformation, and frankly, that does take having a solid business case. Yeah.
Clarification: do you also support RSA and VMware, the other parts of,
Yes.
EMC? So how do you reconcile the probably fairly different requirements from, let's say, a security business like RSA versus a storage hardware business or a partially owned VMware business?
You mean in my day job or in advising you?
Your job in terms of providing services.
So, this conversation, that architecture picture that I showed you, right? There are many, many different components here that are non-EMC storage company components, right? So we would suggest to you that you have your choice of orchestration engines, but one of them you might want to consider is the VCAC technology from VMware. And if you're thinking about that as an orchestration engine, there's folks at VMware that know how to help you with that.
What I'm asking though is, are you providing services in your catalog for these diverse business units like
Is
RSA?
EMC
Very different from,
Yes.
from storage.
Yes.
That's my question.
Yes. Oh, so thank you. So EMC IT has business units just like you do, right? The RSA business unit has different requirements than the storage business unit or the pivotal big data business unit. VMware, by the way, is a separate company entirely, so they have a very separate IT department. But with the exception of VMware, EMC IT provides IT services to all of those environments. And you're right, there's an RSA service catalog that looks slightly different. So if you're an RSA employee, you won't have EMC blue, you'll have RSA red and logos, and you will have a different set of services that business unit requires. That's not that hard to do technologically, right? I mean, once you understand RSA needs different kinds of test and dev environments than EMC IT does, we can go figure out a way to give you what you want RSA and give the storage division something else. But yeah, good question, thank you.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. We need to wrap it up.
So I'll be outside if I don't get to your question, but sir.
Yeah, point well taken about, automating, spinning up test environments and things like that, I'm with you. But in terms of, let's say you have a set of services, third-party cloud services for software as a service. On numerous occasions, myself and also colleagues at other firms, we run into serious integration issues, APIs that are not as advertised. And I find that the time, energy, resources, budget for the initial rollout, as well as long-term, as you make changes, you create additional projects to create enhancements over time, is dramatically higher. And I noticed I didn't see much of that in your presentation.
Well, so good for you. I totally agree with you, right?
Say one more thing. I think there's an increasing need for leaders in integration, as well as specialists in integration. I keep thinking to myself, the guys who are in charge of that should be top-notch because it's actually the most complex area often.
Yeah. I mean, the siren song that says software as a service is way better than anything you do internally. That to me is that whole cloud message gone wild, right? So I think you can way overdo it with third-party services.
Yeah, a friend of mine at the Big Four rolled out I won't mention the product, but a cloud service CRM product at a Big Four consulting firm. Didn't lose his job over it, but I think resigned over it because of, even as a Big Four, could not get enough attention from the provider to do adequate integration.
Yeah. So the cost of the software as a service package is not the cost of the software as a service package. It is the integration of the software as a service package into your service catalog and to get that data integrated into your core data. Oh my gosh, right? So I think the decisions about what you broker and what you do yourself, those are really, really big decisions. And I do not think, please don't take this as default to third party whenever you can. Like, those costs need to be really well understood, because
Understand if you don't, until you try it.
they are, but they're getting better, by the way. We know, I mean, CRM, like, you know, lots of folks know a lot about what it takes to truly integrate the data architecture of Salesforce.com into your core data architecture. So certain key packages, that's getting way, way better. I grant you that there's always something new and cool and interesting, and it's advertised as being seamlessly integrated. You know, there are smart questions you can ask that you're learning, it sounds like, to make sure that that's really the case. And I would not advocate that everything that can be done in a public cloud should be done in a public cloud. Absolutely not. But I do think it's important to step back and ask yourself, what am I getting from where?